of Kyiv. We met with the head of the World Health Organizations. We met with the Chancellor of Germany, and how and have a for the important role that Germany is playing, and of course for their hospitality. We met with the Secretary General of NATO, the President of the European Commission. The list goes on and on of the bilaterals, in addition to the very significant presentations that we saw. What I heard, my takeaway from all of this is that in the interest of peace and putting diplomacy first and thinking about how we engage innovation and how we mobilize our defense resources, innovation on how we review our security relationships. Technology makes a very big difference in all of the above, and I see an openness and willingness here to, again, take inventory, take stock, and take action as we go forward. With that, I'm pleased to yield to the distinguished chair of the Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff of California, who's been involved in so many of these issues for such a long time and no stranger to the Munich Security Conference.
For your leadership of our Congress and your leadership here at the conference. As we speak, there are around 150,000 Russian troops poised to invade Ukraine. They pose a threat to the territorial integrity of Europe and to peace everywhere. In the face of that threat, NATO is more united than ever, ready to impose the most severe sanctions ever. We hope and pray that this will not be necessary. The door to diplomacy remains open and will be open until and unless Putin slams it shut. If Putin invades, the casualties could be enormous in Ukrainian lives and Russian lives, and that loss of life will be entirely Putin's responsibility. Putin will be to blame. Ukraine poses no military threat to Russia, none. Putin understands this. It is the success of Ukrainian democracy that unnerves the Kremlin, and it is the success of democracy everywhere that is also at risk. In that sense, Ukraine's struggle is all of our struggle, and we stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine.
Congressman Lee.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. First, thank you, Madam Speaker, for your tremendous leadership and for bringing this congressional delegation together to advance our commitment to global peace and security. I'm very proud to be standing with many of my colleagues on these efforts. Our congressional delegation, as you heard from our speaker and Mr. Adam, Mr. Smith, excuse me, Adam, excuse me. We're here to make it clear that, of course, Congress remains fully committed. We remain committed to our NATO allies and to the people of Ukraine. We're here also to remain and say once again, we're here to protect our own country's national security interests. Also, I want to reemphasize the fact that we all know and are here to talk about democracy. Democracy remains the most essential defense against pluralism around the world, and no democracy is exempt from this. That's why defending democracy, both at home and abroad, must be an urgent national security priority. And the Congress, under Speaker Pelosi's leadership, we continue to address domestic threats to our democracy, such as, but not limited to, campaigns of surging mis- and disinformation. Our Appropriations Committee, our State and Foreign Operations Subcommittee, which I have the privilege to chair, has really played a crucial role in putting forth our values on the world stage, from pandemic relief to economic assistance to humanitarian aid, and of course to advancing diplomacy, which is the priority pathway to peace. And so I'm hopeful for the future that because of working with our allies through diplomacy, we can find peace through dialogue. Thank you again, Speaker Pelosi.
Thank you, Congresswoman Lee. Congresswoman McCollum. Madam Chair McCollum. Thank you. Madam Chair Lee.
As a daughter of a veteran, and if my role in funding our armed services in the United States, no soldier wants to go to war. To remain, I've heard that they want to resolve the Russian aggression peacefully on the border of Ukraine. It is up to Russia to end this crisis. What I have witnessed here just invigorated me even more. The work of NATO working together, the work of the EU working together with its partner nations, make a strong commitment that should Russia cause this crisis to go into conflict with the loss of civilian lives in Ukraine, we will respond swiftly and quickly with sanctions. Sanctions that will bring great harm to the economy in Russia, and we're prepared to work together as democracies to say we will not tolerate this rogue behavior from Russia any longer.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, Mr. Chairman, all of you. The diplomacy is still alive in all of this, to the last second of it. And but let's hope that it will prevent the initiation of hostility. It's really sad for the Russian people because the sanctions could hurt them. People could die. Russian soldiers, Ukraine soldiers, civilians, all because of Putin. Any questions? I want to hear from Michael Fisher first from DPA.
Yes,
Michael.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. There has been a lot of criticism on the German role in the Ukraine crisis recently, also in the US. Do you think Germany should be tougher on Russia? Do you think Germany should send weapons to Ukraine? And do you think Germany should stop Nord Stream 2 straight away?
Commend engage in the sanctions in such a strong way. We know in the United States that sanctions have a collateral damage for other places. You feel the effects of them. They're felt more strongly in Russia, but they had their impact elsewhere. I have no complaint about the U.S. ambassador. All of our diplomats, including our Secretary of State, have been very positive about Germany. Now, the EU is and NATO, there's diversity. And you have diversity of opinion, and you have diversity of timing, and the rest. So no, I have no complaint about that. I think it's clear that we are unified at this time, and that unity takes some negotiation in terms of the tactics to use. I do want to say, though, that I think it's important that Putin know that the time it took, and any complaint that somebody give him pause, because that means that the conclusion will be swift and they're going to be painful. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Madam Speaker, you talked about sanctions.
Excuse me, any of our colleagues want to weigh in on that?
You did a great job.
Hmm?
You did a good job.
No.
Madam Speaker, you talked about sanctions, but when it comes down to real attacks, could you explain us, are sanctions enough? There have been sanctions for years now.
Seen any sanctions as we're going to see now. This has been ratcheted up because the stakes are so high and the lives that could be lost are so many. So this isn't about sanctions on trade violations or sanctions on one thing or another. This is sanctions in respect. Any comments on sanctions that you'd like to make?
Or how will you react on cyber attacks, for example? Will the U.S. react in a proper way?
mean our initiating cyber?
No, Russia starts with cyber attack.
Well, that's what I was thinking of. Well, maybe I didn't say it here, but what I did see, I touched on this earlier, saying I see an interest in being innovative and how we go forward with our military, our negotiations, our structure, and all the rest will be brutal. It's so sad because here we are. Maybe this is what motivates Putin. Who knows? But it's the 100th anniversary since the Russian Revolution, the Soviet Union came to be. Well, maybe for a change, and that would be to have them have more self-expression, not be afraid of a democracy abutting his nation in Ukraine. I think that part of his fear and Putin's insecurity is that the people of Ukraine have embraced democracy, free market system, and the rest, and they like it, and they for cyber either to initiate or to respond to. One more? Yeah, please.
On the issue of cyber, and frankly, even beyond cyber, we have enormous intelligence cooperation with our NATO allies, with Ukraine. We have gotten very good at attribution, and so in the event of cyber actions, we will be working to try to mitigate and negate those Russian efforts and be sharing timely information with our allies. I would also say that I think that the United States declassified and shared intelligence about Russian efforts to create a false flag operation and pretexts. And I think it's been very instrumental in demonstrating the bad faith of the Kremlin, that they are concocting pretext for war. We'll continue to do that and share intelligence both privately and, when appropriate, publicly, so that the world is informed of who is initiating the hostility here, and that is Vladimir Putin.
Madam Speaker, we just heard a very passionate speech by Ukrainian President Zelensky, and he basically asked for a timeline for security guarantees. Such guarantees at this point, or how do you react to that? And Congressman Schiff, you said that Ukraine's struggle is your struggle. Volodymyr Zelensky said there is, in the 21st century, there is no more not my war. So would Ukraine's war also be your war?
Let me just say that we represent a small fraction of our congressional delegation, because they told us only 4 people could fit in the room. But we've had the Affairs Committee, which has jurisdiction over sanctions, the Intelligence Committee, the other committees that have some play in all of this. And so we listened with great interest to President Zelensky's speech and presentation, really proclamation, and it was very, why would he? He had a mission and he accomplished it. But it isn't for any one nation to be saying that another nation should be part of NATO. Like, we just met with the Secretary General of NATO, for whom we have great respect, and again want to make timing and the geography of NATO. We have a great deal of respect for the Secretary General. On the 70th anniversary of NATO, which was 3 years ago about, Secretary General Stoltenberg, to address a joint session of Congress, which is he honored us with his presentation about NATO. And again, it's not for us to say here and now about the expansion of NATO. I was present at the expansion of NATO in 1997 with President Clinton and Senator Biden at the time. And the enthusiasm to expanding it then was great. And the NATO has to go through that cumulative. And look, the assault, Putin's assault on Putin's assault on the Ukraine is an assault on democracy. We all have to know that and respond in ways that are effective, appropriate, and in some cases, not speaking human-wise, but technology-wise, deadly. Yes, sir. You had a follow-up from Mr.
He said, for a century, so is Ukraine's war also your war?
Well, I think to the extent that Putin's motivation is to put down a budding democracy on his doorstep. The fact that Putin was, I think, terrified by the success of color revolutions around the world, and the example that it poses for the Russian people. Why should the Russian people be forced to live under dictatorship if Ukraine can be a successful democracy? Why can't they be as well? And in that sense, yes, I think an attack on Ukraine to try to put down that democracy is attack on democracy generally. And I do agree with President Zelensky that the rest of the world is watching this. And to bring about the toughest sanctions that have ever been deployed, and other nations will feel free to subjugate their democratic neighbors. I think what gives me heart of NATO. I think something that must have come as a rude shock to Vladimir Putin and the power of the punishing sanctions. And so I think we will demonstrate, if necessary, and again, we hope that it won't be necessary, but we will demonstrate that this is all of our fight by the strength of the costs we impose on Russia if they invade.
If I just may say on that question, we're not for any war. And the diplomacy. And that's why we're talking about sanctions in the event of an invasion. And these are sanctions as if you've never seen before in terms of the intensity and the timing. NATO is ready. The U.S., something that takes a long time, there'll be that banking system. Not that adjective, not that timetable. Why Putin thinks that there's an appetite for what I don't even think the Russian mothers want to see their sons or daughters come home in body bags. For what reason? To kill Slavs? To kill Ukrainians? Ethnically similar and the rest? Neighbors. So it is, there is a price to pay in terms of personal cost, in terms of what happens in Russia, if they even report it in Russia, and again, in terms of that. But it's not a question of saying whose war is what war, with all due respect to the president. I thought his presentation was a tour de force. He had a mission, he came, he accomplished it, he challenged. What is the effectiveness of these institutions that have been, whether it's the UN, the EU, the NATO, and the rest? If our people have to die, it's a legitimate question. We don't think war is the answer. You had one more question? Yes. I was going to close.
So
yeah.
If there is an invasion in the next couple of days, will Congress come back early? What will Congress do in response? And if I may also for Chairman Schiff a question, if you could talk about the latest intelligence, the strongest intelligence that shows that an invasion is indeed imminent. What is the strongest intelligence
that you can talk about?
You won't tell
Well, I share our president's conviction that there is a strong likelihood of a Russian invasion. They've amassed an enormous force that they have drawn from all over Russia. They have developed detailed to serve as a pretext to mislead the world about who is the source of aggression. And Ukraine poses no military threat to Russia. So why undertake those actions? With what goal in mind? And nonetheless, until we continue to urge diplomacy, we hope that there is a way to provide an off-ramp for the Kremlin. But it will be up to Putin to take it. But I do believe that until we can find another path through diplomacy.
Did you have a two-pronged question?
The first question was, will Congress come back?
Oh, well, let me just say this. In terms of the sanctions, which is what we have been talking about as if he goes in, the president has the authority to implement those sanctions without the Congress. We have a bill in the House, the Meeks bill, and the Senate Menendez bill, which are pretty much the same, mirror each other. One of the questions between the parties is, do you go put the sanctions first in case he was going to be doing it 2 weeks from now, do it now? The European countries will feel some of the pain of the sanctions, not to do it until and if he goes in. But let me say this personally. You're first to know. Don't tell anybody I told you this, okay? There's a price to pay for what Putin has put us through now. This isn't bully the world and then take a walk and you're off the hook. So I do think that there will be in Congress, from our own standpoint, now we'd rather not, we'd rather always work in a multilateral way. But that does take time and consensus and an statement in that regard to implement the sanctions. From what we have heard from our different meetings that I mentioned to you earlier, that there is a readiness on the part of NATO and the NATO countries to be very soon in this. I'm going to say one more thing, but before I do, I want to yield to my colleagues for any closing statements.
Well, I was just going to say, Madam Speaker, thank you so much for bringing us here, in which both Democrats and Republicans attended, and both were very thoughtful and very thorough. And so we're here as a delegation with Speaker Pelosi, but there's also other U.S. delegations here. So we're bicameral, the EU's united, and we're ready to do what it takes if Russia walks away and does not listen to us carefully and allow diplomacy to be given a fruitful chance. So we're very united, and I'm very grateful that I got to see the other countries here united in this effort to stop the attacks on democracy.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. And let me just close my remarks by saying once again that I chair the subcommittee that invests and funds all of our diplomatic initiatives throughout the world. And I was struck by the unity here by putting diplomacy first and by the language on the back of the chairs in the conference room that said peace through dialogue. And let's be hopeful that that's where we end with this crisis before us with Ukraine. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
That's a nice way of saying what we say is jaw, 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 not war, war, war. Did you have a closing statement? Well, I just would like to get back to something Madam Chair Barbara Lee said earlier about democracy and the threat to democracy that Putin is foisting onto Ukraine. I'm going to quote a Republican president, Ronald Reagan. He said, "Freedom is a fragile thing, and it is never more than one generation away from extinction. It must be instantly by each generation." We understand that responsibility. We know the threats that are there. We saw Putin try to influence our election in 2016 in some ways successfully. I mean, successfully for him. We saw his impact on some elections in the rest of the world. We see his misinformation constantly. I heard from in Moldova, the impression among some people in the population is that Ukraine did something and Russia has to respond to it in NATO and not in NATO about the misinformation that is out there. And all of that misinformation is a threat to democracy and people making thoughtful decisions based on the truth. So as we are here, it's really important for you to know that I've never, for a very long time, I also have been going for more than 25 years to intelligence briefings, and I can say flat out, and I think some of my Republican colleagues would agree, that the intelligence briefing, we asked for the entire House to get the briefing, was in terms of the threat, the intelligence about the intent, the casualty count that would come with it, how can I say it? The weaponry that is at everybody's disposal, and by weaponry, I don't necessarily that would be. So people are pretty ready. They're pretty ready, and I think it's really an eloquent statement to be ready, to be prepared. Both same thing, prepared with the sanctions, so it won't take a long time if he decides to go on, and it won't be a long time for the Russian people. Insecure decisions being made by their president for what purpose? No purpose, no good purpose at all. But anyway, we're happy about the unity we see in NATO. We're happy about the unity we see with NATO, EU, US, strengthened and encouraged by that. I would say hopeful, but we can only be hopeful if we can stop the aggression. I'll just say this one more thing. Some of the groups that I've heard the most from in preparation for this trip were our veterans. And our veterans just kept saying something, diplomacy, diplomacy, diplomacy. As you said earlier, diplomacy, diplomacy, diplomacy. So for our veterans and their families, and for the families of all of Europe and Russia, let's hope that sanity prevails. Thank you all.